Right, okay then, so in this little tutorial here, I'm just going to actually show you how to use absolute and relative cell referencing. So, as you can see, I've set up this little simple receipt thing here. I've put in a drop-down data validation for these country codes, and I've done a little nested if statement just to change this VAT rate depending on the country. Okay, so what we need to do is we are going to use some relative referencing so that when we drag values downwards and copy them, they actually know which row they're on. We're also going to use a relative cell referencing so that it locks the value here at the VAT20 rate. Now you'll see how that works and why that works in a second. So let me just fill this out then with a simple product ID, say, and I'm going to give it a nice little price of 1.2, and there's the currency. Okay, now I'm then going to work out the VAT price. So if I were to actually say it was B5 times B2, that would give me a 20% VAT, which is absolutely fine. And then what we do in here is we do the total is obviously the price plus the VAT, and that'll give us a final total. Now, as we know, we should be able to pull values down, and what will happen is they will update so that they'll read the new values. I'm just going to copy that product ID down and increment it by 1. I'm just going to pull this down so I don't think of too many prices and increment that by 1 each time. Now what you're going to see happen here is because we're currently using a relative cell value, as I pull this one down, you'll see it starts to do a weird thing. So on here it's pointing at B5 and B2, but on this one it's actually pointing at B3 because the value is relative, it's moved down by 1. What that means is that by the time it gets to this one, it's trying to actually do the price, the word price times B7, which it can't do because that is not a valid sum. So this is where absolute referencing comes in hand, where we actually fix a value permanently on a cell. If I check here and put a $ in front of the B and the 2, and then I copy this downwards, you'll see that as it goes downwards, although the actual first value is relative and it knows to increment it by 1, the B and the B2 are locked in place. Now what that means is that if I were to pull it downwards or across, it would always be locked in that B2. The reason you have to put $2 in is because of this. It locks each segment. So if I actually removed the dollar from the B, now it won't make much difference when I'm pulling values down, but say for instance I was pulling values across, you can see it moves to C and then D because the actual letter is still relative at that point, but the row, so the column is relative but the row is absolute, and you can set whichever one you want to be relative and absolute. It's why it works so well, this. Anyway, it's best to lock them both in if you know that it's never going to be anywhere than there. Then we can just finish this off by auto summing. So we can just auto sum these. Now look here, can we see B5 to B29? And what we can do again is I can pull that across, and because it's currently relative, you can see the column will actually increase. Interestingly, if I pull this down, you can see because the rows are still relative, the rows will actually increment down if we need it to. So it's very important to know when you need to lock these cells and when you don't need to. We could try and lock the actual rows and then pull it down, and you'll see that it'll actually copy it. It actually knows not to increment it by 1. Same goes, however, if I were to actually do this and lock the columns and pull it across, you'll see that it's always actually pointing at the same set of columns and rows, and that's the idea of absolute. It's to lock them in place, which of course I don't want on that one. Okay, and that's it. That is how simple absolute and relative cell reference is. It's just about using that $ to lock a cell in place. If you want to lock the column, you put a $ in front of the letter, and if you want to lock a row, you put the $ in front of the actual number, and it's that simple.